As the first light of dawn stretches across the Atlantic, it touches a stretch of shoreline on Long Island that most people once passed without a second thought. Gilgo Beach, quiet, windswept, and seemingly unremarkable, sits along Ocean Parkway in Suffolk County, New York. Few who drove past its dense roadside brush could have imagined what lay hidden within it. In the winter of 2010, what began as a routine search for a missing person along this shoreline would take a turn no one anticipated. Officers combing the area made a discovery that stopped the investigation in its tracks: human remains. And then more. Each find deepening the silence, each one raising questions that would take years to begin answering. That stretch of Long Island sand would soon carry a name recognized across the entire country. Gilgo Beach, a name that would come to define one of the most haunting and complex criminal investigations in American history. For more than a decade, the Gilgo Beach case remained largely unresolved. Some victims went unidentified for years, while others were identified, but their cases stalled without meaningful progress. Families waited. Investigators continued working. The public grew increasingly frustrated as time passed without answers. Then, advances in forensic technology and a comprehensive review of previously collected evidence began shifting the investigation in a new direction. A renewed examination of digital records, physical evidence, and forensic material eventually led authorities to focus their attention on a specific individual. In July 2023, authorities arrested Rex Heuermann, a New York architect, in connection with the Gilgo Beach case. The arrest marked the most significant development in the investigation since the original discoveries along Ocean Parkway. It is essential to state clearly that Rex Heuermann has pleaded not guilty to all charges filed against him. The criminal proceedings remain ongoing through the judicial system. This documentary will report only verified facts, not speculation. This documentary exists for a specific and deliberate purpose. Over the course of 3 parts, we will examine the documented facts of the Gilgo Beach investigation, honor the victims whose stories deserve far more than a footnote in a criminal case, explore the investigative breakthroughs that finally moved this case forward after years of silence, and explain why this investigation continues to capture national attention more than a decade after those first remains were discovered along Ocean Parkway. Everything presented in this documentary is grounded in verified information, court records, and publicly confirmed findings from law enforcement. Throughout all 3 parts, we will carefully distinguish between allegations brought forward by the prosecution and facts that have been formally established through the legal process. These are not the same thing, and treating them as such would be a disservice to everyone involved. That standard of accuracy will guide every word of what follows. Chapter 1 begins on December 11, 2010, a date that would permanently alter the course of Long Island's history. Suffolk County police officers were conducting a search along the Ocean Parkway area, initially connected to a separate missing persons investigation entirely unrelated to what they were about to uncover. A trained police dog accompanied the search team through the dense roadside vegetation lining the shoreline. During that operation, officers discovered human remains carefully concealed within the thick brush near the water's edge. What made this discovery particularly alarming was that it did not stand alone. As investigators methodically expanded their search perimeter over the following days, additional sets of remains were recovered from the surrounding area. Each new discovery deepened the gravity of what law enforcement was confronting. This was clearly far more than a single isolated incident. The scale of what was emerging along that quiet stretch of shoreline signaled the beginning of a complex and deeply troubling investigation that would demand significant resources and attention from authorities. Within days of that first discovery, 4 separate sets of remains had been recovered from the area surrounding Ocean Parkway. Investigators worked carefully to identify each victim, through forensic analysis and missing persons records. They eventually confirmed the identities of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, Lynn Costello, and Maureen Brainard-Barnes. The media collectively referred to these four women as the Gilgo Four, a name that would stay with the case for years to come. Each of these women had previously been reported missing, and their families had spent years searching desperately for answers, not knowing what had happened to their loved ones. The confirmation of their identities brought devastating certainty to families who had lived with painful uncertainty for far too long. These discoveries marked the formal beginning of one of the largest and most complex homicide investigations in the entire history of Suffolk County, setting in motion years of investigative work that would follow. Chapter 2 steps back from the investigation itself and turns toward the people at the heart of it. Before becoming names in a criminal case, each victim was a real person. She had a family, friendships, personal struggles, and a life that mattered deeply to those who knew her. Mothers, sisters, daughters, and friends, each one carried a story that extended far beyond the circumstances of her disappearance. For years, families had been publicly appealing for information, holding on to hope while living with devastating uncertainty. The discovery of remains along Ocean Parkway finally answered the most painful question, confirming what had happened. But a second and equally urgent question remained entirely unanswered. Who was responsible? Investigators also identified additional remains in the surrounding area over time. Notably, not all of those discoveries have been publicly connected to the same perpetrator, a detail that would shape how authorities approached the entire investigation going forward. Authorities repeatedly cautioned that the Gilgo Beach discoveries may involve more than one offender or represent multiple, entirely unrelated cases. This was not a minor distinction. It shaped the entire direction of the investigation from its earliest stages. Rather than grouping every set of remains under a single theory, investigators treated each victim's case individually. Every piece of evidence connected to each victim was carefully and separately evaluated. Investigators refused to make broad assumptions that could compromise the accuracy of their findings or mislead the direction of their work. This methodical, disciplined approach was not simply procedural caution, it was essential to maintaining the integrity of an investigation that had grown far beyond what anyone initially anticipated when those first remains were discovered along Ocean Parkway in December 2010. What began as a search for a missing person had quietly expanded into one of the most complex and far-reaching criminal investigations in the history of Long Island, demanding patience, precision, and an unwavering commitment to following the evidence wherever it led. Chapter 3 examines the long and difficult years of investigative work that followed the initial discoveries along Ocean Parkway. Law enforcement agencies received thousands of tips from the public. Investigators conducted extensive witness interviews, carefully reviewed missing persons reports from across the region, analyzed telephone records, and repeatedly re-examined physical evidence collected from the scene. Despite these sustained efforts, public frustration grew steadily as years passed without an arrest or meaningful public update. Families waited, communities questioned, the case appeared to stall. Yet behind the scenes, something important was happening across the broader landscape of criminal investigation. Advances in forensic science and digital technology were quietly transforming how cold cases could be approached throughout the United States. New analytical tools, improved deoxyribonucleic acid testing methods, and expanding digital investigative capabilities were creating possibilities that simply had not existed when the Gilgo Beach case first began in December 2010. These developments would eventually matter enormously. Recognizing that the investigation needed a completely fresh perspective, Suffolk County established a renewed task force with one clear mission: start from the very beginning. Rather than simply accepting the conclusions drawn by the original investigation, detectives returned to the foundational evidence. Witness statements were re-examined with fresh eyes. Digital records were reviewed using capabilities that had not existed years earlier. Forensic evidence was reanalyzed through modern investigative techniques that investigators could only have imagined when the case first began in December 2010. This deliberate, methodical reset would ultimately become one of the most significant turning points in the entire Gilgo Beach investigation. As Part 1 draws to a close, the pieces of this long unsolved puzzle were finally beginning to shift. Ahead, investigators would follow a trail built from phone records, vehicle information, surveillance analysis, and DNA evidence. Each element, carefully examined and connected, would slowly bring this deeply complex case into sharper focus than ever before. Part 2 begins in 2022, a year that would prove decisive in the Gilgo Beach investigation. Facing a case that had stretched across more than a decade without resolution, law enforcement took a significant step by forming a dedicated multi-agency task force. This was not simply a continuation of previous efforts. It represented a deliberate and structured recommitment to solving the case from the ground up. The Suffolk County Police Department joined forces with the New York State Police, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office. Working together, these agencies returned to the very beginning, re-examining original witness interviews, telephone records, vehicle information, digital evidence, and physical evidence gathered years earlier. Each piece was reviewed with fresh perspective and modern investigative tools. Officials later confirmed that this renewed and coordinated review became one of the most important turning points in the entire investigation, restoring momentum to a case that had, for many, appeared to have stalled indefinitely. Chapter 5 focuses on the digital trail that investigators began carefully following. According to charging documents, investigators examined historical cell phone records connected with communications involving some of the victims. These records became a significant thread in the broader investigative effort, allowing authorities to trace patterns of contact that had previously gone unexamined. Authorities also reviewed vehicle information and revisited witness statements gathered during earlier stages of the investigation. By combining older evidence with newly developed analytical methods, investigators were able to approach the case from a different angle entirely. These combined efforts eventually focused investigative attention on Rex Heuermann, a New York-based architect. Court documents describe how multiple investigative steps were undertaken as authorities worked to build their case. This included physical surveillance operations and careful analysis of publicly available records. Each step was methodically documented as investigators continued constructing probable cause necessary for an arrest, moving the decade-long investigation closer to a significant legal development. Chapter 6 turns to the forensic evidence that prosecutors have publicly described in their court filings. Among the most significant elements discussed are DNA analyses, including hair evidence recovered during the investigation. According to prosecutors, advances in forensic testing allowed investigators to revisit previously collected evidence using modern scientific techniques that simply had not been available during the earlier stages of the case. This development proved meaningful, as evidence gathered years prior could now be examined through a far more sophisticated lens than what existed when investigators first began their work. The narrator notes that defense attorneys have actively challenged aspects of the prosecution's evidence and the investigative methods used throughout the case, raising their objections through the proper legal channels available to them. This is a standard and fundamental part of the judicial process. Ultimately, it is the court, operating under established rules of law and evidence, that determines how each piece of evidence is evaluated, not public opinion or media coverage. Building on the forensic and digital evidence gathered over years of renewed investigation, the case reached a defining moment in July 2023. Authorities arrested Rex Heuermann in New York, marking one of the most significant developments in the Gilgo Beach investigation since those first devastating discoveries along Ocean Parkway back in December 2010. The arrest sent shockwaves across the country, reigniting public attention on a case that had haunted Long Island for over a decade. Following the arrest, prosecutors moved quickly, announcing formal charges connecting Heuermann to several of the victims. As the investigation continued progressing, additional charges were subsequently filed, reflecting the ongoing nature of the legal proceedings. It is essential to state clearly what the record shows. Throughout every stage of these proceedings, Rex Heuermann has consistently pleaded not guilty to all charges brought against him. No verdict has been reached. The criminal case remains actively before the courts, and the legal process continues moving forward as both sides present their respective positions. Following the arrest, the case moved into an extensive series of court proceedings that continue to this day. Numerous hearings have taken place addressing a wide range of legal matters, including the admissibility of DNA evidence, the handling of digital evidence, the validity of search warrants, discovery procedures between prosecution and defense, expert testimony, and various pretrial motions filed by both sides. The prosecution continues presenting its allegations through the structured framework of the judicial process, while defense attorneys actively challenge portions of the evidence and question certain investigative procedures used throughout the case. These legal challenges are a standard and essential part of how the American justice system operates, ensuring that all evidence is properly tested before any conclusions are reached. Because the case remains active and ongoing, many of the most significant factual questions surrounding the Gilgo Beach investigation will ultimately be resolved inside a courtroom rather than through public speculation or media coverage. Part 3 opens by stepping back from the details of the investigation to reflect on something fundamental to the American legal system. No matter how significant an arrest may appear, every defendant is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in a court of law. That principle is not a technicality. It is the foundation upon which the entire justice system rests. An arrest represents the beginning of the legal process, not its conclusion. Since Rex Heuermann's initial arrest, prosecutors have expanded the charges as additional investigations progressed, reflecting how complex and evolving this case remains. At the same time, defense attorneys have actively challenged aspects of the prosecution's evidence, raising questions about forensic analysis and investigative methods used throughout the case. Prosecutors, in response, maintain that physical, digital, and forensic evidence collectively supports their allegations. These competing arguments will ultimately be weighed not by public opinion, but by the courts, exactly as the system was designed to function. As this investigation has unfolded over many years, one message has been repeated consistently by those leading the case. The focus must remain on the victims. These women were not simply names printed in newspaper headlines or case file numbers assigned during a criminal investigation. They were real people. They had families who loved them, friends who remembered them, dreams they carried, and futures that were never given the chance to unfold. Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, Lynn Costello, and Maureen Brainard-Barnes each left behind people who never stopped searching for answers. Their loved ones spent years making public appeals, attending press conferences, and waiting through more than a decade of uncertainty before significant developments finally occurred. The grief those families carried was immeasurable. Whatever the final legal outcome of these proceedings may ultimately be, the stories of these women remain at the absolute center of this case. Their lives deserve to be honored, remembered, and told with the dignity and respect they were always owed. Chapter 11 examines how modern forensic science has reshaped the Gilgo Beach investigation and countless others like it across the country. Investigators have described advances in deoxyribonucleic acid analysis, digital evidence processing, and investigative technology as critical factors in moving this case forward after years of limited progress. What makes the Gilgo Beach case particularly significant, how it demonstrates that evidence collected years or even decades earlier does not necessarily lose its value over time. As scientific methods evolve, previously unreadable or inconclusive evidence can sometimes be re-examined with entirely new results. Cold cases across the United States have increasingly benefited from these same advances. Genetic genealogy, enhanced digital forensics, and improved laboratory techniques have helped investigators revisit evidence that once appeared impossible to interpret. The Gilgo Beach investigation stands as a powerful example of how patience, persistence, and technological progress can work together to bring long-stalled investigations back to life in ways that earlier generations of investigators could not have anticipated. The Gilgo Beach investigation has become one of the most closely followed homicide cases in modern American history, and for understandable reasons. It touches on issues that extend far beyond a single criminal case. The investigation has sparked meaningful national conversations about how long-term missing persons cases are handled, how forensic science continues to evolve, and how cooperation between multiple law enforcement agencies can breathe new life into investigations that once appeared permanently stalled. For families of missing persons across the country, this case carries a particular kind of significance. It demonstrates that even after many years without resolution, unanswered questions can still be addressed. Evidence collected long ago can be re-examined. Cold cases can move forward. The Gilgo Beach investigation reminds us that persistence matters, that technology changes what is possible, and that victims who were once forgotten by headlines can still receive the attention their stories deserve. That message resonates deeply with families still waiting for answers of their own. The discoveries along Ocean Parkway changed everything. Families who had spent years searching for answers finally received confirmation of what they had feared, while simultaneously facing the painful reality that justice still required time to pursue. Investigators spent years following thousands of leads, reviewing mountains of evidence, and applying emerging technology to one of the most complex homicide investigations in American history. That persistence ultimately produced results that many had feared might never come. The legal proceedings involving Rex Heuermann continue moving through the judicial system. He has pleaded not guilty, and the courts will determine what the evidence ultimately establishes under the law. Throughout this documentary, we have worked to distinguish between allegations presented in court and facts established through the legal process. That distinction matters deeply. What cannot be disputed is the dedication of investigators who refused to allow this case to quietly disappear, and the enduring importance of remembering every victim whose story deserves to be told with honesty and dignity. Justice is rarely swift. It can take years, sometimes decades, to pursue, and even then, the legal process does not always bring the closure that families deserve. Courts will determine the legal outcome of the proceedings involving Rex Heuermann, but no verdict can restore what was lost. The memories of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, Lynn Costello, Maureen Brainard-Barnes, and every other victim connected to Gilgo Beach endure through the families, friends, and communities who continue to honor them every single day. If this documentary moved you, we invite you to share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a future investigation, and stay engaged as this case continues developing through the courts. Remember to stay curious, seek the verified facts, and never reduce a victim to a headline. Every person lost in a case like this had a life, a story, and a truth that deserves to be told with honesty, care, and respect.